OK, thank you. Sandwich between Ian and Dara, I think I am probably Piggy in the middle, my official role for the morning. The mental health bit, just a quick sort of context for that. Sainsbury's Centre for Mental Health, 15% of police business, they estimated, in 2008 was directly related to mental health. I think probably if they did that piece of work again now, it would be a more significant figure. That's not what I'm going to talk about this morning. I'm going to talk a bit about engagement, the controlling mind behind that engagement, Peel, context, which might include that if you get engagement better, crime might go up, as in reports. Something about legitimacy, and Ian's already touched on it. The sense of fairness, which is something that is regularly polled, is really important in establishing legitimacy. Touch on engagement, and as a backdrop to everything I say, John's comments at the start around the breadth of whom we are engaging with is a really interesting aspect to just keep in your mind. I'm going to dally with new media and finish with some comments on PCCs, although without ever at any point breaching the electoral legislation. And please don't take anything that I say as an encouragement or discouragement to vote on the 15th of November, because if you do, I go to prison, which would be bad. When I get to Sir Robert Mark and acceptability, it is over. OK. The controlling mind. 25 years ago, the controlling mind behind the policing operation that I joined was Lord Deer. And 25 years ago, almost to the day, I was sat at Tally Ho at the West Midlands, and he came and spoke to a graduate familiarisation course. What this means is if the next 20 minutes is awful, it's his fault. The other looming presence at Tally Ho was Peel, who stands outside the West Mids Training Centre and who said these things, well, probably didn't say them actually for criminologists in the room, quite a big body of evidence that maybe he didn't quite say them and maybe they were put together quite a long time afterwards, but we'll roll with it. So the police perform their duties. It's completely dependent on public approval, the willing cooperation of the public in voluntary observation of the law. My own force, we have 3,500 people. We police 1 million people. We cannot police by enforcement alone. We're completely and utterly outnumbered. And that is absolutely at the heart of what we do. And the other forces in the room will have similar numbers and similar ratios. And so cooperation, crucial, and we've chopped up the bottom bit, which is about service to the law. A quote which I had to fall back on the other week when somebody shot some burglars in a rural village just outside of Melton Mowbray. So Peel, right at the outset, says we've got to do this with people. Some context. The top line is what the British Crime Survey says that people are telling the survey that they have experienced in terms of crime. And the bottom line is recorded crime. Starting on the left, the old counting rules. Dark blue, new counting rules came in, trying to standardise that, so there's some comparison. And then post the National Crime Recording Standard, crime going down. I mean, in my own force yesterday, the police authority put out a release, and in there holding me to account, crime is at a 22-year low, recorded crime. Now, I think one of the challenges of what Ian has said, which I thought was fab, is that if you get your engagement better, then the gap between the little thin line and the bar graph may well close, which would be a good thing because people will then be reporting their lived reality. The downside is recorded crime would then be going up. And there are certain offences that we know are hugely underreported. Domestic abuse. I lead for ACPO on disability issues. Read the Equalities and Human Rights Commission report, Hidden in Plain Sight. It will tell you that disability hate crime is hugely underreported. And actually now all forces are engaged by the HRC and we've got a legal duty to increase that reporting. So there's some interesting sort of tensions in that as context. But a good news story. I was on Radio Leicester yesterday. I'm sure you're all keen listeners to Radio Leicester. And I was able to sit there and they said, oh, crime, it's gone down a lot, hasn't it? And I was able to say, yes, blame the police. Although partners helped a lot and the local community. And for anyone who's a fan of Freakonomics, if you read Freakonomics establishes an argument that crime fell in New York, not because of Giuliani, not because of Bratton, but because there was a change to the abortion law a decade before, or 15 years before. You're nodding sagely. You probably know more about it than I do, but there we go. But that is what it concludes, isn't it? This is an interesting area, and this is confidence data across the last 18 months from the British Crime Survey. So the dark blue block is the police and the council are dealing with the local issues that concern me. And you can see it's gone from 50-something at the left-hand side to around 60. That's an average. And I guess one of the challenges in this is hugely varied. And some of you will be looking, thinking, oh, that's quite high. And some of you will be looking at it thinking it's quite low. That's the national average. And I guess there's a thing there about localism, because localism will tell you a different story. And I know Dara's perhaps going to touch on some of this in what he's going to say. The lighter colour, local police are doing a good or excellent job. Average sort of 60%. There's an area there that I think probably we can all work on. And you can see the increase that has gone on with the governance of police authorities. And I guess if I was standing as a PCC, which the law says I can't, that would be an area I would be thinking about. And then the sort of bluey colour, the police dealing with things that matter, again, going up. So a sense that it's going the right way, but probably it could be lifted a bit. I've got to put this one up. This is a 6-year study of who do we trust? Judges, senior police officers. What were we? Liberal-minded bedwetters or something? I can't remember what you said. I wish I'd written it down. I was still trying to tweet the dog poo quote, which I thought fitted in 140 characters quite well. A long-term study of trust in professions. So you can see there, that kind of bears out what Ian said around views of the state, the governance of the state. And it's into this that we play our engagement. Oops. Recently, you may have noted The Guardian, that was a YouGov poll after an interesting bicycling incident in London. Gate, as I think it's properly called. And the recorded crime, down. So I guess what I'm saying is, the context of this is that whilst everyone will have their own local variety on these metrics, something is going right along the way here. And it's into that the changes in governance that Ian's talked about will play. This is something I've been playing with. A couple of you I know were at the Superintendents Association conference. There is a huge thing about legitimacy. All of this engagement is not because it's nice to do, it's because it increases our legitimacy. And how do we get legitimacy? Something about being transparent, something about being open, something about how we communicate or what we communicate, and something about accountability. And it all comes together so that you finish up with an officer or a PCSO or a call taker making a decision on behalf of the police that has legitimacy, and people respond to it because of that legitimacy. You virtually said this, Ian. You kind of spooked me a bit. We have not spoken at all about what we were going to say, but you... So Henry Ford, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And I think that was reflected in some of what you said. This has been a changing agenda. I think it would be fair to say in '88, when I joined the West Midlands, we did not do as much of the engagement as we are now doing. The world has changed across that time. Some things. Physical presence, it has a value. On the left, a Koban in Japan, the concept that an officer will know everybody in their area. The Koban is a significant physical presence in the middle of a neighbourhood. On the right, the police box in Bradgate Park, Leicestershire, same concept. Slightly more deer, probably, in Bradgate Park. It's my small advert for Leicestershire's tourist board. But there's something there about physical presence, and that's about having bases and places where people know you are going to be. And I have to say, I don't think those are always police stations. They are bases where people are accessible. It might be an office in the front of a supermarket. It might be a room at a hotel at a travel hub. Somewhere where you know people are going to be, I think is more important than a rather splendid Victorian edifice that isn't in the right place anymore, because in the 100 years since, the society's moved. We still have, and I own the business area in which this sits, 3,600 neighbourhood policing teams, mixtures of officers and PCSOs, doing things like street briefings, going to a street, what is the problem in this street? We're going to be there at 6:30. We'll be with the local councillor, local social services. Come and say hello. Looking at joint action groups, and you'll probably all call them something differently. Groups where key partners sit down and deal with, well, who are the names that we share as offenders? Who are the people we know and share as victims? Working on sharing, information collation and sharing. Yeah, I'm very struck that every review of anything never says there was too much information sharing. It is still an area that we need to work on with partners, using problem solving, using it meaningfully and cross-agency, and local surveys, trying to delve in and drill into what are the issues locally. And certainly my neighbourhood teams are all identifying all the time, these are the top 3 issues in this area and this is what we're doing about them. But what we need to do is get more sophisticated in the drilling into that, because there is a risk sometimes that we speak with the worried well who tell you about dog poo, I think, to quote the eminent Oxford professor who preceded me. So lots of this work is going on. So I guess going forwards, there is a base on which to build this engagement. Whether it is as sophisticated as it needs to be, I doubt, but it is certainly progressing. Interesting stuff from Holland, a concept there in Holland where local people, in effect, vote for what the police do with a certain amount of discretionary time. And I know there's a number of forces looking at this now, and they have a slightly different structure because some of the people being deployed belong to local councils. But in effect, local community meetings get given a discretionary amount of police time and they choose what they want it deployed to. It's a really interesting concept, but it's only as good as the inclusivity of that group. If you've not got the right people around that table, you will be deployed in the wrong place. Engage citizens. The 20,000 specials who did 5 million hours last year, I would suggest are quite engaged. This lot were Team of the Year in Leicestershire because when there was disorder in Leicestershire, they turned out and filled all the gaps that were left by everybody rushing in to deal with it. And they got bricked and all sorts, and they stood the line. And rather strangely, they all came back the next day and did it again in their own time. Heroic. 5 million hours. Volunteers going on. Rob Beckley's here, and this afternoon we're doing a session. I think I'm now officially Rob Beckley for this afternoon's session. Marion's over there. She's very excited at this opportunity. Yeah, look at the excitement. But we'll be doing how far can you take volunteering, I think, is a really interesting question. How inclusive is it? Do the right people volunteer? And what are the limits around volunteering? Best part of 1 million hours. Blaby volunteers, National Police Volunteer Team of the Year for the 3rd time, I think, in 4 years. Target hardening, doing joined-up work with the fire service, doing early evidence capture, actually, at certain incidents. Really engaged citizens doing great work. Neighbourhood Watch. I had to mention Neighbourhood Watch because Marion's here, who's Neighbourhood Watch in Leicestershire, and she would otherwise lynch me. Really interesting how Neighbourhood Watch is developing. Probably 3.5 million people engaged in Neighbourhood Watch. And on Twitter, Mark Easton on BBC, he does a watch spotting. So if you're aware of a sort of watch that isn't covered there, please send it to him. He gets very excited. But that actually reflects listening to people and taking the concept of Neighbourhood Watch, which probably conjures up an image of a street, and saying, well, actually, how does that work on allotments or around faith communities, and how can that add value? And all of that driven, of course, by a sort of civic desire to help and make the world a better place. And a huge network there that already exists and is quite lined up on IT as well. Okay, in the absence of the APPO president, it would be rude not to quote him. Hugh, we are quite transparent, and Lord Deere alluded to this in terms of where are we nationally and internationally. We are transparent. If you look at Hillsborough, I sense some of the rage about Hillsborough is as much about the lack of transparency and the sense that there was something there that should have been known as other issues. Op Peninsula. The EDL on the left and Unite Against Fascism, and a few more did turn up, on the right, decided they wanted to come to Leicester on what turned out to be about the coldest day ever in the history of Leicester, I have to say. I know that other forces have done this kind of stuff, but in terms of engaging citizens in the lead up to that, which was their second day, what did we do? We know the Met have been having Liberty in the room with them. We had an advisory group which included all sorts of different people. Certainly was, the police were a minority on it, to talk about what are the issues, what can we do about those issues in advance. We had local radio broadcasting live from in the police control room all day. I know, and we had community mediators, volunteers. They were given some measure of advice about the law and what they could or couldn't do, but they were just as much a part of the police operation, not as in the sense that they were biased, but they were physically present on the ground in communities. And actually, if you did turn up that day to either demonstrate or perhaps to cause trouble, probably the first person you met was a community mediator who would talk to you about, oh, well, actually, the rules for the demo, you want to go that way, you want to go that way. Lay visitors visiting people arrested, dip sampling of complaints by members of the police authority, and then reported back on publicly. Huge public consultation by us about, well, this is what we're going to try and do, and this is why, and what do you think about that? Hundreds, and I mean hundreds of consultations with different people. And then on the day, we invited the Bishop, the High Sheriff, different leaders, and we said, here's one of our police officers. They will take you wherever you want to go today to see whatever you want to see. And actually, some months later, when there was some critical report by a particular pressure group, I didn't have to say anything because those key figures said, well, we spent all day looking at this and we didn't see any of those things happen. So completely transparent. I mean, I've got to be honest, I had some reservations about our policing operation being broadcast live on local radio, but you know what? I was wrong. And social media. That slide's bounced around a bit. Familiarity breeds consent. Great quote. It's not good or bad, it just is. It can help rioters to organise, but it can help connection. Especially for Lord Dear there, the tweeting police car. At this point, I was going to show you a lovely slide about volume of new media around the Olympics. Because on any individual day at the Olympics this time round, there was more traffic on new media than in the whole of the Beijing Olympics. It's a real, and friends from BT, there's some scary presentation I've seen from you about bandwidth and stuff that I didn't begin to understand, but there were big numbers. I thought what I'd do is ask. So on Twitter on Saturday, much to my wife's general delight, I said, anyone got any ideas of innovative ways we can connect the police with the public? And these are just selected. Oh, the slide's gone all a bit funny. Top left, Oakham Police saying what a good lot they were in Surrey. Constable Chaos, just been commended by Greater Manchester Police. The hashtag Cover for GMP was the start of the movement that saw thousands of police officers attend funerals in Manchester last week. Yeah, so there's an interesting thing about engaging with ourselves. Someone from the NHS used Storify, which is a storyboarding technique. David Watts, I don't know David. He might be in the audience, I don't know. He's a councillor in Nottingham. Relocate the police station, get it aligned with Citizens Advice Bureau. So why don't you set up a taxi watch, which was one of the missing watches from the list. Blog, engage, Facebook. Neighbourhood watch. Marion, you said you'd cheer. Thank you. Neighbourhood alert. Direct access to local people based on you choose. This morning on the way down here, I've received from the PCSO, who has the great pleasure of having the Chief Constable live on his neighbourhood, a message telling me if I'm dropping my child off at school, please could I think about how to park? Please could we work on this together so that we don't have to move to enforcement? A really good, tailored to me, because in my multiple choice requests about what I want off Neighbourhood Alert, I've given a geographic area and I've described the age ranges of issues that I'm interested in. So really tailored. Victoria from Rethink the charity, some work West Mids did. Joe Arundel, who is a diversity sergeant, independent advisory groups, making sure that local people are engaged. Charities, third sector involved. Lena Samuels, who's a member of the Hampshire Police Authority. Open yourselves up. And the St Matthews, well, Zoe, who's a MSc student at Leicester University who I met the other week, and St Matthew's Police, one of my own, Bobby Bingo, which is a bit like the Hampshire thing, cop swap. If you get given your card, you have to find your beat officer and get them to sign the card. Fantastic engagement with young kids, and you can play top trumps with it, because I'm too tight to give my kids their own presents. Who says being a chief has aged me, eh? Bloody look at that, hey? That's dreadful, isn't it? And then you get to this. 50,000 messages of condolences. Do we begin to imagine 50,000 people would have written to Peter Fahey? 50,000 people acknowledging, supporting, and do you know what? I think it's made cops realise that the public actually do spare a thought for them in a way that is pretty profound. So, new media is a really interesting one. It is not the panacea to everything, but it is a way of engaging with people, especially if it is a cold, dark, wet November day. I love the way nobody's saying it's going to be a cool, cold, bright day. It'll be gorgeous to walk to the polling station, are they? It's always going to be cold and wet. We'll see. Last couple of things. New governance and new opportunities. There is going to be a vigorous and public debate on policing. I think that's a good thing, and Ian's hinted a lot at, what do people want the police to do? Intriguingly, the Home Secretary in her sort of statement around crime fighting has now given that quite a broad interpretation of what crime is. So if you thought it was just about what a recorded crime is, it's not. It's crime in its broadest sense, and that might mean a vulnerable missing person who we need to find and protect. Appointing chief constables, the role of the public. Some colleagues will curse me. The process that I went through to be selected for this job involved presenting to 50 local people my vision for policing Leicestershire and them asking me questions. And it included some councillors, members of the youth parliament, members of the public, different faith communities. I was dreading it going into it. Do you know what? It was the most fun I've had in a selection process ever. Now, okay, there are better times than selection processes, but it was really good fun. But 50 local people were involved in the process of picking the chief constable. And yeah, there were other parts to the process. Enhanced focus on what local people want. I think there's a really interesting thing there, which is, what is the question that local people are being asked? If you ask people, do you want crime to go down? They will say yes. If you ask them, do you want to be safer? They will say yes. They might not be the same question. Yeah, because policing over time has changed. In the 80s, when I was a PC in Birmingham, we would go to certain houses to domestic assaults. She would say she wouldn't complain. He would go to his brother's. We would write it in our pocketbooks. They would sign it. We would say no complaint, no police offences, and go away. 20-odd years later, he would be arrested, and I know there's a debate to be had about whether that's right or wrong, but he would be arrested. We would be doing risk assessments. We would be moving into a multi-agency risk assessment conference process. It has changed a lot, but I guess the challenge, and particularly perhaps to those of you who are standing for PCC, is what is the question that you're asking local people? Because more safety might not be the same as less recorded crime. It's a really complex relationship. Enhanced focus on what local people want. Ian's already alluded to one-to-one relationship with the chief. There's huge opportunities around drink, drugs, mental health, offender management, criminal justice. A lot of the discussion has been about the police bit. The and crime bit is, in my view, where the huge opportunities are. Absolutely huge opportunities. And advocacy, what are you going to do when it's going right? Is a really interesting question. And all the debate seems to be about what you're going to do when it goes wrong, which usually has career-ending implications for me and my peer group. What are you going to do if it's going right? How are you going to deal with that? I think it's an interesting thought. And it's great news now, Robert Mark. One of my predecessors in Leicestershire fought what he calls in his autobiography the 3-year war to bring traffic wardens into the city. The fact that the British police are answerable to the law, that we act on behalf of the community and not under the mantle of government, makes us the least powerful, most accountable and therefore most acceptable service in the world. 1973 Dimbleby lecture, it still passes muster, I think. the best part of 40 years later. So, hopefully, if it was awful, it's Lord Deer's fault and he's on next. Hopefully we've touched on Peel. Engagement's really important. There is a lot of it going on. There are lots of ways of doing it. It is not the silver bullet, because after the engagement, there will need to be a place where there's a judgment and a prioritisation. But at the heart of it, engagement is fundamental. And, to finish, I'm still struck by the fact it remains an offence at common law not to help a police officer if they ask you to help. And there is a reason for that, which is we have an engaged, civic policing model that has lasted now nearly 200 years, and let's hope it will last another 200. Thank you.
Lovely photo of you.